He noticed an unoccupied spot beside a woman who appeared to be alone. He made his way toward the seat, thinking he could sit and blend in for a while. But as he neared her, he saw her more clearly. A striking figure, dressed in a regal gown made of fabrics he couldn't identify, shimmering in the light. Her presence was magnetic, drawing the eyes of everyone nearby. The moment he sat down, he realized his mistake. This wasn't just any ordinary guest. The woman beside him was no less than the queen of the Zarathi Empire, an alien civilization known for its advanced technology and vast territory. His heart skipped a beat as he stammered an apology, his hand already rising as if to move away. But then she did something unexpected. She gently placed her hand on his arm, stopping him. Her touch was surprisingly warm, and her fingers, soft yet firm, sent a strange kind of shiver up his spine.
"Don't stand."
"Stay here," she whispered, her voice a calm, melodic sound that seemed to resonate deep within him. Her eyes met his, and there was an intensity in her gaze that made him feel like he was under a spell. For a moment he thought about standing up, about making his excuses, and leaving. But there was something in her presence that made him hesitate. Something about her felt different from everyone else in the room. She wasn't just the queen of an alien empire. She had an aura about her, a power that demanded respect without ever having to raise her voice. "I'm sorry," he managed to say, though the words seemed weak in the face of her gaze. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," she interrupted, her smile both kind and knowing. "You're exactly where you need to be." The words, though simple, settled in his chest. He didn't fully understand why, but they felt true. He sat there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The space between them felt charged, as if the very air around them had shifted. He glanced around, noticing that the other attendees seemed to be avoiding them. It was as if everyone knew who she was and gave her the space she needed, yet no one dared to approach her too closely. This only confirmed what he already suspected. He had accidentally sat beside someone who could have anyone in the galaxy at her side. And yet, here she was, asking him to stay. As the event continued around them, he found himself drawn into a quiet conversation with her, though he wasn't sure where to begin. His mind raced with questions, but they felt trivial. What was the queen of the Zarathi Empire doing at a casual gathering like this? Why had she taken an interest in a simple human like him? She smiled at him again, sensing his confusion. "You seem uncomfortable," she remarked, her voice warm, but with an edge of amusement. "This is your first time among people like us, isn't it?"
"Yes, I'm not used to this kind of crowd. You'll get used to it," she said.
"And you'll come to realize that no matter how different we may seem, we all share one thing in common. We all want to be understood." Her words were both comforting and disarming.
He wanted to ask her more questions, to know what it was that made her so different from the other powerful beings in the room. But for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to speak. Instead, he just nodded, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. There was something undeniable about her presence, something that made him feel both small and significant at the same time. The conversation drifted naturally from one topic to another, though she seemed to guide it, gently pushing him into new territories of thought. She asked about Earth, about the simple, everyday lives of humans. She listened intently, as if every word he spoke was a treasure to be examined. There was a sense of curiosity in her gaze, but it wasn't like the kind of curiosity one would expect from someone studying an insect, or a curiosity of the mind. It was genuine, sincere. She told him stories about her empire, of the struggles she faced as a ruler, of the expectations that weighed on her shoulders. Her people, the Zarathi, were known for their strength and intelligence, but they had lost their way. Their empire, once a beacon of hope in the galaxy, was slowly falling apart due to infighting, corruption, and external threats. The Queen spoke of the pressure to maintain her legacy, to restore the strength of her people. There was a vulnerability in her voice when she spoke of her people, a side of her that not many had the privilege to see. As the conversation continued, the protagonist found himself entranced, not just by her beauty, but by her insight, her wisdom, and the quiet sadness that she didn't try to hide. It became clear to him that this queen, powerful and revered by so many, was as lost as he was in the vast expanse of the universe. She wasn't just a leader. She was a woman with burdens and dreams of her own. The room around them began to fill with noise once again as the event carried on, but he barely noticed. For the first time since he had arrived, he no longer felt like an outsider. Sitting beside the queen with her hand still resting on his arm, he felt strangely connected to something much larger than himself. The crowd, the whispers, the distant stars. It all faded away as the queen turned to him with a look of calm reassurance. "You are not alone, human," she said softly, her words a promise that lingered in the air. "And neither am I." Her words wrapped around him like a warm blanket, comforting him in a way he hadn't realized he needed. He was certain of one thing now. This was no ordinary meeting. The course of his life had just changed, and he had no idea what it would mean for him or for the galaxy. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not when he had so much to learn from her. The days that followed were a blur of activity and confusion for the protagonist. What had started as a simple diplomatic gathering turned into something much more significant, something he couldn't fully grasp yet. After his unexpected encounter with the Queen, he found himself regularly in her company, assisting her in various discussions and tasks related to the Empire. She never asked for his help, she merely invited him, almost as if she knew he had a role to play in all of this. It wasn't just the Queen's beauty that had caught his attention. It was the way she made him feel like he was the only one who mattered in any room they shared. Her voice, her presence, even the subtle touch of her hand had left an indelible mark on him. Despite her immense power, there was a vulnerability in her eyes that stirred something inside him, something he couldn't name. As the days wore on, the protagonist began to notice small things, how the Queen's attendants, usually so composed and unwavering, seemed tense around her. Her bodyguards, towering and fearsome, always stayed a few paces behind, their expressions unreadable. It was clear that the Queen was no ordinary ruler. She carried a heavy burden, one that only she seemed to fully understand. One evening, as the two of them sat on a balcony overlooking the bustling spaceport, the Queen turned to him. Her eyes, usually so focused on the horizon, softened when she looked at him. "Tell me," she asked, her voice gentle, "do you believe in destiny?" The question caught him off guard. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure of how to respond. Destiny? He wasn't sure what she meant. All he knew was that he was an ordinary human, and the idea of destiny had never really crossed his mind. I'm not sure," he said slowly, trying to find the right words. "I always thought we make our own way. That life is about choices, not fate." The Queen smiled at his answer, but there was something sad in the way she did. She stood up and walked to the edge of the balcony, her gaze distant as she looked out into the vastness of space. The stars seemed to twinkle in the distance, as if they were trying to offer answers. "You are right," she said quietly. "For most it is about choices, but for some, fate is unavoidable. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, there are forces beyond your control, pulling you towards something you cannot escape." He watched her, wondering what she meant. There was a depth to her words that he couldn't quite understand, but he could feel the weight they carried. After a long pause, she turned back to him, her expression shifting to something more serious. "I will share something with you, something few have ever heard. My empire is dying, and I am the only one who can save it. But even I do not know how." Her admission stunned him. He had heard whispers about the struggles of the Zarathi Empire, but hearing it directly from the Queen herself was something else entirely. He knew that the Empire was a powerful force in the galaxy, with vast territories and an advanced military. but even such an empire was vulnerable. "What happened?" he asked, unable to keep the concern out of his voice. The Queen sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping slightly as if the weight of the galaxy had momentarily crushed her. She seemed smaller, more fragile in that moment, like the powerful ruler she appeared to be had faded away, leaving behind a woman who was fighting to survive. "The truth is," she began, "the Empire is fractured. There are those within it who seek to destroy what I've worked so hard to build. Corruption, rebellion, it is everywhere. And the worst part is, no one truly trusts me anymore, not even my closest allies." The protagonist didn't know what to say. He couldn't even imagine what it would be like to carry the responsibility of an entire empire on his shoulders, to have every decision weigh so heavily on his soul. But there was one thing he was certain of. He didn't want to leave her side. Not after hearing her share this vulnerability. Not after seeing the pain behind her eyes. "Is there anything I can do to help?" he asked quietly. The Queen regarded him for a long moment, as if considering his offer carefully. Then, with a slight shake of her head, she replied, "I'm not sure you can."
"But you've already done more than most." He frowned, confused.
"How?" Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "By staying."
"By being here, you've given me something I haven't had in years. Someone I can talk to. Someone who doesn't see me as just a queen." The words caught him off guard, and for a moment he found himself speechless. He had only been trying to help, trying to make himself useful in a situation that felt too big for him. But now, hearing her say that, something deep within him shifted. Maybe it was true. He had a role to play here, even if he didn't understand it fully yet. The Queen's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. Her touch light but firm. "You have no idea what you've done for me already," she said quietly. "The universe has a way of bringing people together when they need each other most. Perhaps that is destiny." Her words lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. He couldn't deny that there was something special about their connection. Something that went beyond mere chance. He didn't know where it would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't leave her side now. He had no idea what was to come, but he would stand with her, through whatever challenges lay ahead. As the evening wore on, the two of them sat in silence, watching the stars flicker in the distance. The hum of the ship's engines was a constant backdrop, a reminder of the journey they were all on, though they were traveling toward unknown destinations. The Queen seemed lost in her thoughts, her gaze far away as if she were pondering something that had been weighing on her for a long time. Finally, she turned to him again, a resolute expression on her face.
"There is a mission," she said, her tone now serious. "A mission that could save my people. But it requires a great deal of trust."
"And I would like you to help me with it." The protagonist's heart raced as he heard her words. He hadn't expected to be asked for anything, but the way she looked at him, as if she were counting on him to understand, made him feel like he had no choice but to say yes. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady despite the swirl of emotions inside him. The Queen took a deep breath.
"We need to unite the factions within the Empire before it collapses."
"But that will only happen if I can prove that humans and Zarathi can work together, that our strength lies in unity, not division." He nodded slowly, realizing the enormity of what she was asking.
"The task ahead would not be easy, but if it could save her people, if it could save the galaxy, it was a mission worth undertaking."
"I'll help you," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes." Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw something he hadn't seen before. Hope. It was faint, almost like a flicker, but it was there, and it made all the difference. The Queen smiled, a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I don't know what I would do without you." He had a part to play in the future of the galaxy, one he hadn't planned for, but one he was ready to embrace. He would stand beside her, through whatever challenges came their way. Together, they would change the fate of the Empire. The days following their conversation about the future were filled with preparation and anticipation. The protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to unfold, though he couldn't predict what it would be. The Queen had shared a glimpse of the heavy burden she carried, and now, as she entrusted him with a task that seemed nearly impossible, he felt a deep sense of responsibility settle over him. He was no longer just an outsider in the midst of an intergalactic gathering. He was part of something much larger than himself. The mission was clear, though its difficulty was overwhelming. The Queen needed to unite the factions within her empire before it crumbled under the weight of division and distrust. She had already made attempts reaching out to various powerful figures within the empire, but all had failed. The task ahead was daunting. Convince the leaders of the fractured territories to come together, to put aside their grievances for the sake of the future. But the bigger challenge was the unspoken truth the Queen had alluded to. The Empire had grown weak, and the galaxy was beginning to notice. The Queen, for all her strength and wisdom, was beginning to show cracks. The weight of her responsibilities was taking its toll, and the fatigue was visible in her eyes, even in the moments when she tried to conceal it. The protagonist, though still unsure of his own place in this grand scheme, found himself more determined to help her than ever. One evening, as they sat in her private quarters discussing the next steps, the Queen turned to him with a rare seriousness. She had been silent for some time, her gaze fixed on the map of the Empire projected on the wall before them, as if searching for some hidden solution that might restore peace. "I can feel the tension growing," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the vastness of the room. "Every day it becomes harder to keep everything from falling apart. My people, they need hope, but I'm not sure I can give them that." The protagonist glanced at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He wanted to say something reassuring, but he knew that words alone wouldn't fix the situation. The challenges they faced weren't just political. They were personal, deep-rooted, and woven into the very fabric of the Empire's history. "You've given them everything you can," he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling within him. "You've led them with strength and wisdom, but even the strongest leaders need help sometimes." "You don't have to do this alone." The Queen's eyes met his, and for a moment, it felt like the world outside their small bubble ceased to exist. She studied him with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. Her hand, delicate yet firm, rested on the table between them, and he couldn't help but notice how it trembled slightly, a small sign of the pressure she was under. "Thank you," she whispered. I've never been able to show anyone this side of me. It's hard for me to let go of control, but I trust you. You're the only one I feel I can truly rely on right now." Her words settled deep within him, giving him the strength to continue. He had no idea how to fix everything, but he knew that they were in this together. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. The Queen needed not just his help in uniting the Empire, but his support in helping her rebuild herself as well. If she was to have any chance of success, she needed to believe in the possibility of a future, one that was not burdened by the failures of the past. They continued their planning late into the night, strategizing their next steps. The protagonist couldn't help but notice how the Queen's demeanor shifted as they discussed their options. With every new idea, she seemed to regain a bit of the confidence that had once radiated from her. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there.
Her hope was beginning to return, one small step at a time. The following morning, they set their plan into motion.
The protagonist traveled with the Queen to one of the Empire's major territories, where tensions were particularly high. The region, known for its resource-rich planets, had been the site of numerous skirmishes in the past, and its leaders were some of the most difficult to sway. The journey was long, and the air was thick with the weight of the task ahead. The Queen was quiet during the flight, her thoughts clearly elsewhere, but she remained composed, her regal presence unwavering. Upon arrival, They were greeted with a mixture of wariness and respect. The leaders of the region, some young and ambitious, others old and stubborn, gathered to meet with the Queen. The room was filled with an undercurrent of tension, everyone aware that this meeting could decide the fate of their future. The Queen addressed them first, her voice commanding yet soothing. She spoke of unity, of the strength that could be found in cooperation, and the importance of their shared history. Her words were carefully chosen, meant to appeal to both their pride and their desperation. She acknowledged the divisions that had caused the Empire to fracture, but she also offered a vision of what they could become if they worked together. The protagonist stood silently beside her, his presence a quiet yet steady reminder that he was a part of this mission. As the Queen spoke, he couldn't help but admire her ability to command attention without ever raising her voice in anger. She was a leader, not because of her power or her title, but because of the way she made others believe in her vision. When she finished speaking, there was a long silence in the room. The leaders exchanged glances, as if weighing her words, considering whether to accept the offer she had laid before them. The tension was thick, and the protagonist could almost feel the weight of their decision pressing down on him. Finally, one of the older leaders, a grizzled veteran of many wars, spoke up. His voice was rough, but there was a hint of respect in his words. "You speak of unity, Queen, but you forget one thing.
We have fought for our independence for centuries.
Why should we submit ourselves to your rule? What's in it for us?" The Queen's gaze remained steady as she met his challenge.
What's in it for you?
She repeated, her voice calm but filled with authority.
You'll have the chance to rebuild your empire.
You'll have the strength of the human alliance at your back. You'll no longer have to fight each other, not when there's a much greater threat on the horizon.
If we don't unite, we risk losing everything.
The room grew quiet again, and the protagonists felt the weight of the moment. They were at a crossroads, and the decision made here could either change the course of history or drive the Empire further into chaos. Finally, the young leader who had been sitting quietly at the back spoke. His voice was filled with resolve as he stood and addressed the group. "I believe in what the Queen says," he said. "We may have fought for our independence, but what have we gained? We've lost more than we've gained. It's time to put our pride aside and do what's best for our people." The older leaders looked at each other, uncertain at first. But slowly, one by one, they began to nod, as if realizing the truth in the young leader's words. The Queen had won them over, not through force or threats, but through a vision of hope. When the meeting ended, the room was filled with a new sense of purpose. The Queen had done it. She had taken the first step toward uniting the Empire. And as they left the room, the protagonist couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. The Queen wasn't just a ruler. She was a force for change, and he was proud to stand beside her. But even as the mission appeared to be gaining momentum, the protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest challenges were yet to come. They had taken one step forward, but the path ahead was still uncertain. The days that followed the successful meeting with the leaders of the resource-rich territory were filled with both progress and tension. The protagonist felt a growing sense of hope, but at the same time, there was an underlying feeling that the peace they had just achieved was fragile. He could see it in the Queen's eyes. The brief moments of relief were fleeting, replaced quickly by a renewed sense of responsibility. The journey ahead would not be easy. There was still much to be done. The Queen had begun to trust him more with each passing day, not just as an advisor, but as someone who truly believed in the future of her people. She had shared her burdens with him, her hopes, her fears, and in return he had promised to stand by her side no matter what. It wasn't just duty anymore. It was something deeper. He had come to care for her, not as a queen, but as a person, someone who was just as vulnerable as anyone else, even if the weight of the galaxy seemed to rest on her shoulders. The news from the other territories was mixed. Some regions had welcomed the idea of unity, agreeing to send delegates to the upcoming summit, while others remained reluctant, still gripped by old rivalries and fears of losing their power.
The Queen had managed to unite one faction, but there were many more to win over, and time was running out.
The galaxy was growing restless, and the political landscape was shifting. If the factions didn't come together soon, there would be consequences. Terrible, irreversible ones. The next phase of their plan took them to a distant world, one that had long been a center of trade and culture, but was now a hotbed of political unrest. The local leaders had been stubborn in their opposition to the Queen's rule, and the situation had escalated to the point where violence was becoming a real threat. The Queen had no choice but to intervene. This was a pivotal moment. If they couldn't secure this region, the entire empire would remain fractured. The journey to the planet was long, and the atmosphere aboard the ship grew tense as they neared their destination. The Queen had already briefed the protagonist on the situation, outlining the various factions involved and their motivations. But no matter how many times she went over the details, there was still a sense of unease in her voice. She had fought so hard to get this far, but she knew that if she failed here, everything would be lost. When they arrived, the planet was as beautiful as it was chaotic. The surface was dotted with sprawling cities gleaming in the light of a nearby star. But beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. Protests filled the streets, and soldiers stood guard at every corner. The divide between the elite and the working class had never been wider, and the leaders of the planet were divided in their loyalty. The protagonist could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on them as they made their way to the central building where the negotiations would take place. The Queen was silent throughout the journey, her face betraying no emotion. But as they neared the building, she turned to the protagonist, her eyes dark with resolve.
"I've made mistakes," she said quietly, her voice tinged with regret. "I've been so focused on saving my empire that I've lost sight of what really matters, my people."
"They're the ones who will bear the consequences of my choices, not me." The protagonist looked at her, not knowing how to respond. He had seen the burden she carried, the weight of her crown pressing down on her. But he also knew that she wasn't alone in this anymore. They were a team now, and together they would face whatever came next. "You're not alone," he said softly. "We're in this together." Her gaze softened, and for the briefest moment, the mask of the powerful ruler slipped. She looked at him with gratitude, but there was something else in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. It was almost as if she was searching for reassurance, something she could hold on to in the midst of all the uncertainty. They entered the building, and the meeting began. The leaders of the planet were gathered in a large conference room, their expressions wary and distrustful. The Queen stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding the room. She spoke with authority, her voice steady and calm as she laid out her vision for the future of the Empire. But despite her efforts, the resistance was strong. The leaders were unwilling to bend, unwilling to trust her. They questioned her motives, her ability to lead, and the strength of her empire. The protagonist could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Every word spoken seemed to drive the leaders further apart, each side becoming more entrenched in their position. The Queen's words, though powerful, were not enough to sway them. She was losing them, piece by piece, and then, in the middle of the heated discussion, something unexpected happened. One of the leaders, a woman known for her fierce independence and her skepticism of the Queen's rule, stood up. Her eyes were sharp, her voice cutting through the tension.
"I've heard enough," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "You talk of unity, of rebuilding an empire, but you fail to understand the real problem."
The people no longer trust you. They see you as nothing more than a figurehead, a puppet for the elites.
"You've forgotten what it means to lead." The Queen's face hardened, but she didn't interrupt.
She let the leader speak, even as her heart sank. The words cut deep, and the protagonist could see the pain behind her composed expression. She had worked so hard, and yet here was someone questioning everything she had done. But then, something surprising happened. The protagonist stood up, surprising everyone in the room, including the Queen. He spoke calmly, but with the certainty of someone who had found his place in this fight. "She's right," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "The Queen has made mistakes, but she's also the one willing to face them. She's the one who's trying to change things, not just for the elite, but for everyone. She doesn't just want power. She wants to unite us all. You think you're standing up for the people, but you're just pushing us further apart." The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. The Queen, though surprised by his boldness, didn't stop him. She stood beside him, her gaze unwavering. For the first time in this meeting, she wasn't the only one speaking. The protagonist had found his voice, and his words carried weight. They weren't just the words of a bystander. They were the words of someone who believed in the cause. The silence stretched on, but eventually, the leaders began to speak again. The resistance began to crack, and the conversation shifted. Slowly, the Queen's vision began to take hold, not just because of her strength, but because others saw that it wasn't just about power.